The man who just stepped into the confines of a New York City prison was arrested a few hours ago on a charge of felonious assault. And the choice is this: bail or jail.
In this era of crowded court calendars, it may be weeks or even months before his case is tried. How then can the accused avoid languishing in detention cells until he is finally brought before the bar of justice?
Do you feel that there is any alternative to the system?
There is one alternative, and this organization, whose work I think you'll hear more about later, is the Vera Foundation.
One afternoon, I received a phone call from Louis Schweitzer. He had just learned about people in jail awaiting trial for long periods of time. That offended him.
If you were poor in 1961, you probably couldn't raise bail. And because you couldn't raise bail, you were going to sit in jail until your case was disposed of. So there was this hypothesis. If a person has strong community ties, he or she will show up in court.
I'm calling from the Vera Foundation.
And Vera collected the data, and the hypothesis proved correct. They did show up.
In its time, it was absolutely earth-shaking. It was an answer to part of the money bail problem.
It's a little hard to imagine that just 50 years ago, there were no alternatives to bail. No one was released on their own recognizance. And now, 50 years later, about 60% of everyone who's arrested is released on their own recognizance.
The District of Columbia launched a bail project about 2 months ago. Early February, a Des Moines pretrial release program was started.
And then the Department of Justice took our model and started putting it throughout the federal system. After that, the mayor and the courts gave Vera office space, which was priceless, in the New York City Criminal Court building at 100 Center Street that said, "We will work with you."
He had this notion government would try things, would try innovations with an outside partner, which was genius in and of itself. It had never really been done before.
Public-private partnership is this big phrase of the moment. Well, the fact is, Vera started that 50 years ago.
Vera's presence and Vera's intervention forced these agencies to begin looking at their own functions in a different light.
I never thought of it as revolutionary. I thought of it as an improvement in the system of justice. I don't know if we've ever even put out a press release about it.
Herb was never a self-promoting guy, and Vera was clearly not a self-promoting organization. The idea was, let's see if we can solve the problem, and let the agency that contracted with Vera to have this work done take the credit for it.
What Vera's trying to do is help government be the best that it can be by helping them solve what are some of the most intractable problems that we face as a society.
It was the first operation in the country, and possibly in the world, that dealt with a street alcoholic. Most people wrote them off as the treatise of social life in the city.
Police would go around in their wagons, see people lying around in the Bowery, drunk, passed out, pick them up, and transport them to jail.
We had something like 3,000 to 4,000 arrests a year on average. It took a lot of police time, prosecution time, judicial time, and occupied space in the jails.
They'd start to detox, and then they'd be out on the street again. And again, it was sort of Vera's and Herb's genius that, looked at that problem and said, if you keep responding to it like that, it'll never go away.
The Manhattan Bowery Project was founded after a brief experiment in which a New York City police officer and the director of Vera, then Herb Sturz, went out in the street and asked Bowery alcoholics did they want to get help. To the shock of everybody who saw them doing this, they got 75% positive response. And people came in, got treated, dried out. So you have a marked financial savings, and you have saving people's lives and returning them to productive life.
Government is really good at operating and managing sort of large-scale public projects. It's less good at starting new things.
Vera can help chisel out time and space for them to take a step back and look at policy issues.
Vera is an organization that can think and do at the same time, come up with ideas and then actually put them on the ground.
The government is not committing itself to full-time employees for a lifetime career, but simply for that period of time.
There are other places that do research, there are other places that do consulting, but there's no place else that does the action, policy-oriented research we do, combined with planning and running and spinning off demonstration projects.
The number of organizations that currently exist that are playing a valuable role in New York City that started as Vera projects is just tremendous.
In the last 50 years, Vera has created 17 independent corporations dealing with vulnerable people, trying to come up with a more humane and more efficient way of handling whatever is standing between them and being a productive member of society.
The reason that Vera created the Neighborhood Work Project was to answer a pretty simple question. What happens to people when they come home from prison and they can't find a job?
Before the Neighborhood Work Project in New York, prisoners were released in Queens Plaza with $40. You were releasing people who had almost no other choice except to get in trouble again.
During those first few months post-release, they're at their most vulnerable of committing another crime, and they're less vulnerable to committing that crime if they're working.
The solution was to put them to work doing something that was useful for the city and that would give them some skills, and to pay them at the end of each day. That really was revolutionary.
If I employ people and they don't go back to prison, that has a reverberating effect on their children, on their families, and on their communities.
Vera, over the years, has built a reputation for integrity, for caring, for persistence.
It's very satisfying to work at a place where the problems that seem insurmountable are the problems we tackle.
I think that it invests in really bright, energetic, and committed people, and those are the places where the ideas come from.
At the time, an underlying theory behind policing was the assumption that random patrol was a way of preventing crime from occurring.
Patrol traditionally was carried on in radio motor patrol cars.
That wasn't working very well, so Mike and I essentially designed the idea of the Community Patrol Officer program.
The function of the officer then was not just to go out and walk around and be visible and deter through his visibility. His function was to go out and talk to the community, to find out what the community viewed as their problems, to work on solutions, to work with other city and private agencies to bring other resources to bear on those problems.
After the first week of operation in the 7-2, the precinct commander received 15 calls from residents of the precinct telling him that there were people out in the streets impersonating police officers.
Every single community planning board in the city was calling the police commissioner saying, when are we getting our CPOP unit?
Over the next three and a half years, we had the program operating in all 76 precincts in the city.
I think one of the things that Vera does well is learn from the past, and so it's constantly looking at contemporary issues while remembering what we learned from prior experience.
The Appearance Assistance Program was created to show that the immigration system was in fact overusing detention as a tool to get people to appear in immigration court for their proceedings. 91% of all the people in the program appeared in court, complied with all their legal obligations without being detained. So were it not for this program, they would have been detained at a huge cost to the taxpayers and a detriment to the individuals. We showed that the general principles that Vera had identified going back to the Manhattan Bail Project were applicable to the immigration system. That led the Department of Homeland Security to institutionalize alternatives to detention, and it has influenced people and governments in Europe and Australia and other places around the world.
Vera has improved the quality of justice in this country and in other countries. It's affected the lives of hundreds of thousands who needed somebody caring about their problems and helping to figure out solutions.
When I walk through the Bowery, you feel a sense of accomplishment and pride that you've been able to contribute to making a change like that in the city.
We would often have cops tell us, you know, this is why I became a cop.
Time and time again, you hear the same story. I was at my lowest point, and they helped me.
Even if you think you're as far away from the systems we work in as you can possibly get, what we do is in everyone's self-interest.
The things that we get done are significant in making this a better world for everyone.
The original sort of geniuses who created the institution have something to be very, very proud of.
There's a need for Vera today as much as there was, 50 years ago.
Even though I can't tell you right now what the problems will be in 25 or 50 years, we'll be good at figuring them out.
We're in a historical moment. Reform of our huge systems of punishment is more possible than it's been in 40 years. We also know a lot more from research about what works and what doesn't work. We have a bigger national and international focus. In many ways, this is our time. Vera is more important now than it's ever been.